Good morning, my friends. Early in the morning on Friday, August 13th. Hey, it's Friday the 13th. It's going to be a good luck day for you because God's got a plan for you. I'm excited for whatever God does today. Man, my voice is really stuffy. My allergies are going nuts. We spent a lot of time outside yesterday. They're shooting a commercial for the hospital, and they used our property, and we were outside in the wind for like 5 hours after I got home from surgery last night. So, having a little froggy this morning, so sorry about that. But, we're in August, and I've been thinking, Lisa and I have been talking and thinking about the prayer wall a lot. There is some desperation. There are some sad and hard and difficult things on the prayer wall right now. If you're not engaged with the prayer wall, go to wlearnmd.com/prayer and pray. Spend some time praying. Make it part of your daily prayer time to pick a few of these things and pray for the people who are posting their lives out there, and put yours out there too. Let us all join together worldwide and connect with each other in prayer, the most important thing that we can do for one another. And go to wlearnmd.com/prayer and check it out. But I was thinking about that in the context of All in August, and it's been kind of a interesting thing for me. I've been going back in time and finding some episodes that have been maybe out there behind the paywall for only the patrons for a while. Maybe you haven't seen them, or if you're new around here, if you're one of the folks that found the podcast because of Focus on the Family or some of the other media that we've done recently, and you're new, then there's some old stuff that's really useful as we're thinking about how to go all in with God. And one way we can go all in is to learn how to find hope even when it seems hopeless. And there's a scripture I found, Proverbs 12:25, that says, anxiety in a man's heart, worry in a person's heart, weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. And I just want to bring you a good word today. If you're out there and you're experiencing some desperation, if it feels so dark, that's how I felt after we lost our son Mitch. It just seemed so impossible. That didn't seem like the lights would ever come back on. But a good word can make you think that it's possible to feel hope again. Sometimes that's enough. There was a novel I read a while back, Christy Lefteri's Beekeeper of Aleppo, and it's just a hopeless, desperate situation, but there's always a beekeeper out there who's still trying to bring life back to the area. And you should read it, by the way. And then there's a thought about what I used to say, or I still say a lot of times, when somebody's got a cancer diagnosis that looks really dire and it's causing them to lose hope. I say, hey, wait a minute. You got to press through this. You got to stay healthy and eat right and go through your chemo and your radiation, because you know what? There's a nerd in a lab somewhere out there working on this problem, and you got to be strong and ready. When they come busting out of that lab with the cure, you got to be alive and able to get it, right? That's how people felt about the vaccine for COVID-19. They were just like, stay healthy, wait for it, it's coming, and then we'll be able to open things up again. And you've heard a lot of people say those kinds of things. We met a man yesterday whose dad died of really bad COVID pneumonia in December of last year. It's a really sad story, but he's dealing with that feeling of loss and grief and pain, and there's just so much. And so I wanted to go back in time, because I did an episode about this, about the nerds in the labs, about the fact that there's always something good just around the corner. That's what Romans 12:12 says in the Voice. I love it in the Voice translation. He says, don't forget to rejoice, for hope is always just around the corner. So even if you don't feel hopeful now, there's a nerd in a lab. There's something happening out there that you can't see. There's a scripture in the book of Habakkuk in chapter 1, when the world is turned upside down for the prophet and bad things are happening. And God says in Habakkuk 1:5, he says, hey, look around at the nations. Look and be amazed, for I am doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe even if someone told you about it. So friend, I'm just here to tell you, it's all in August. Press in. Don't give up hope. There's a light that's going to come on. There is hope out there. Even if you can't see it right now, just trust that there's a nerd somewhere working on the problem. There's a chemist, there's a scientist. If it's a medical thing, there's somebody working on it. It's going to happen one of these days. You got to fight for it and be ready for it. If it's a relationship problem, there's a possibility that it can turn around. You turn yourself around first and then work on it. If it's a financial situation, there's some help available. If you're homeless, there's an opportunity to find a place to live again. The hope is out there. It's just around the corner. God's doing something in your day that you wouldn't believe even if somebody told you about it. There's hope. And I just want you to press in. If that's all you get out of All in August, it's the idea that never, ever, ever stop believing that you can have hope again. That's what got us through losing a son. It's what will get you through whatever you're going through right now. I'm going to bring this episode back to you with the new exit part so you get the links and everything. But this episode was way back in 2019, Nerds in Labs. It'll really help you. Just find some hope and never, ever, ever give up on the idea that hope is always just around the corner. And the only thing you have to do, my friend, is start today.
Hey, friend. I hope you're well. We spent last week in New York City promoting my new book, I've Seen the End of You, a neurosurgeon's look at faith, doubt, and the things we think we know. We had a great time getting to know the Penguin Random House publicity and marketing people and one of the publishers, and we had just an amazing time in the city. We actually had an invitation to do Fox and Friends, but you couldn't have really picked a busier news week. Apparently, whenever you're invited to be on one of those television shows, it's always contingent with whatever else might be going on in the world. And in the United States, of course, they're impeaching the president. We had the Iran crisis last week, and everybody pretty sure that World War III was about to kick off. We had Harvey Weinstein's trial in the city, the Epstein coroner report, and the dust-up between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry and the royal family that they're now calling Megxit. And on top of all that, there were apocalyptic fires in Australia. And by the way, we're praying for you, Australia. So it's understandable that I didn't get to go on the show, and they said maybe some other time, but not last week. We did, though, get to go to the Fox News studio and recorded with Lauren Green on her podcast, Lighthouse Faith. We had an amazing time. She was a lovely and gracious host, and we really had a good conversation. Lisa and I really enjoyed getting to meet her, and I'll let you know when that episode is going to air. But on top of everything, we just had a wonderful week getting the book launched and signed some books at a Barnes & Noble in Manhattan and just had a good time. It was a lot different experience than I've had with my previous books and really enjoyed that opportunity. I did get many radio and podcast interviews under my belt. We had 15 or so of them last week, and as they post and go live, I'll link all of them to my site so you can see those if you want. And in all those interviews, it seemed like one question sort of kept coming up. The question's something like, when people encounter hard things, like getting cancer or losing a child, how is it possible for them to keep going in their lives? What can you say to someone to help them get back up after life deals them a terrible blow? And if you've been following my newsletter or reading my other books or any of that for a while, you'll know that I've spent years thinking and studying about this very problem. And I've had to answer it for myself several times. I've been divorced, I've been through war, and we've lost a child. So I thought maybe today would be a good time for us to talk about that question of how you get back up when life knocks you down, or how you can help someone else deal with a situation like that. So how do you do it? How do you start believing again? How do you start moving again when things seem so hard or so impossible? And if you love someone who's going through it, what can you say to help them? Well, here's the answer. The reason you can hope, the reason you can't ever give up, and the best thing to say to someone when life is hitting them hard is that there are nerds in labs. Now, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, stick around, and I'll tell you a funny story about nerds in labs. But the first thing you have to do, if you're going to live again when it seems impossible, is you have to start today. Hey, I'm so glad to have you listening today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, and I live in Wyoming in the United States of America with my incredible wife, Lisa Warren. I'm a neurosurgeon and an author, and I'm here to help you harness neuroscience, the power of your brain, faith, the power of your spirit, and good old common sense to help you lead a healthier, better, happier life. Hey, you can't change your life until you change your mind, and I'm here to help you learn the art of self-brain surgery to get that done. You can get the show notes and more on my website at wleewarrenmd.com. And if you like the show, please subscribe to it so you never miss an episode, and leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's how other people are more likely to find out about the show, so we can help them too. This show is listened to in all 50 states of America and 45 other countries every week, and people learn about it when you share it with them. So thanks in advance for your ratings, reviews, and shares. This is episode number 12 of the Dr. Lee Warren podcast, Nerds in Labs. So let's get after it. Okay, in the first draft of my book, I told a story that didn't survive the publisher's edits. Now let me tell you a story about my editor, Susan Jaden. When I first met her, it was electronic, of course, like most introductions these days. And it was after Penguin had acquired, Waterbrook Penguin Random House had acquired my manuscript, and she was assigned to be the senior editor. And there was a story in there in my book about how when I sit down to counsel people, when I am about to tell them that they've got brain cancer or that they have some kind of fatal diagnosis, one of the ways I help them gain enough hope to go through the fight of going through chemotherapy and surgery and radiation and all of that, even when the odds seem to be stacked against them, is that I tell them a story about how out there somewhere all the time, there are nerds in labs, scientists. There's lab work going on all over the world. There are scientists working feverishly to solve the problem every day. I jokingly call them nerds because I used to work in a biochemistry lab, and I'm a total nerd myself, and we called each other nerds. So I wasn't trying to be offensive, but my editor, Susan, in one of the very first revisions of the book, when she sent it back to me, off in the margin, before I'd ever heard her voice in real life, she said, Lee, there might be a group of biochemists or chemical engineers out there who read books and have book clubs, and calling them nerds might be offensive to an important book-buying demographic, something like that. So basically she said, maybe you shouldn't call them nerds. And ultimately I changed that, and ultimately the story didn't even make it into the book. But again, it wasn't an attempt to be offensive. It was an attempt to say, look, when you're going through something hard, when you're getting cancer diagnosis, or you find out you need a transplant, or you find out there's some kind of problem medically with your life, there is somebody out there working on that problem. And that is a real reason to take hope and be willing to fight and go through it. Every year, it seems, another formerly deadly disease becomes a manageable or curable one, because scientists have been gifted by God with brilliant minds and strong work ethics, and people have been moved to donate and to fund research and to bring tremendous resources to bear on these difficult clinical problems. So one of the things I tell people when we diagnose their brain tumor is to keep praying, keep faith, hope, keep it alive, because you need to fight this thing as long and as hard as you can, so that if that happens to come about in your lifetime, when the scientist runs out of the lab with the cure in hand, you'll be ready to get it. So it's amazing, I've learned over the years, how people respond when you give them something tangible to hope for. They just needed to know that the chemists, the nerds, the scientists were out there, that they're not necessarily abandoned to the will of the disease, that someone was working on the problem, and that they're not, in fact, hopeless. And that's what I have for you today, a reminder that there's some version of that kind of hope available to you, no matter what you're going through. But before we go any further, here's this week's things that will help. One of the best interviews I did last week was for a podcast called What Matters Most with host Paul Samuel Dolman. Paul and I had an amazing conversation. It hasn't aired yet, and I'll let you know when it does. But the conversation we had went all over the map about faith and loss and science, society, war, God, and other topics. He even tried to drag me into politics at one point. Thanks for that, Paul. But at the end, he asked me a question that I wasn't really prepared for. He said, what do you think the biggest problem with American society today is, and what can we do to make it better? And I'll let you listen to the episode to hear my answer, but the takeaway is that I think we need to be listening to each other, and we need to be talking to each other again. We've gotten so polarized that we hate or ignore other people's viewpoints, and it's killing our society. We've got to love each other enough to be able to have conversations again, and that requires that we look at things from different perspectives. And along those lines, I have a book to recommend to you. I recently read a novel called The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. It's a story about Syrian refugees during the recent and ongoing war there. And it's made personal by how Christy focuses on one character, a beekeeper named Nuri, and his wife and son. It's not political, and it doesn't get into the reasons for the war or rationalize the refugee problem, doesn't try to solve the refugee problem or suggest how countries should address it. But this book is heartbreaking. It's devastating, but it's also lovely and makes your heart break and soar and crack open and grow a little bit at the same time. And at the end of the day, the book will make you look at refugees in a new light. It moved me from thinking about that problem along political and philosophical and religious lines to thinking about a family and their struggles and how they fought so desperately for life and food and dignity and to try to find hope again when everything was taken from them. And it's a great example of my point when I tried to answer Paul's question. To understand each other again, we have to be willing to walk in their shoes. We have to be willing to ask them questions and think about their answers from their perspectives. And that's something all of us, left and right on the political spectrum, need to be doing more of. I implore you, I beg you to read The Beekeeper of Aleppo. It's probably the best novel I've ever read. I long to be able to write a book with that kind of power and grace, and I pray that I'll live my life being able to see people like Christy Lefteri saw them. Less huddled masses and more individual human souls. And that, my friend, is this week's thing that will help. Okay, so we talked about the nerds in the lab. Now let me make it personal for you. If by the grace of God you don't have brain cancer, I want to find another way to make this episode relevant for you. When I lost my son Mitch in 2013, I was devastated. My wife Lisa was devastated. Our whole family was devastated. I couldn't believe that God would allow something like that to happen. And the problem I really had was that as a neurosurgeon, I've spent 20 years getting to look at the most intricate and delicate parts of the human body, the nervous system. And I've seen far too many miracles to be able to stop believing in God, even when I lost my son. And so since I couldn't not believe in him, I was super mad at him. I just couldn't believe that God was willing to let Mitch die in such a terrible way and to let our family suffer. I was too convicted in my belief that God is real to decide that he wasn't, and so it made me really furious, hopeless. I felt like I was in utter darkness, and I couldn't see how it could even be possible to ever feel joy or happiness again. And Lisa was there with me. So were our other kids. And I didn't know what to do. It was too heavy. It was too hard, too much, too dark, too impenetrable. I couldn't believe that it could be survived. And this coming from a man who's been to war. I've been mortared. I've been rocketed. I've taken care of horribly, devastatingly injured people. I've watched people bleed to death. I've heard their screams and moans, and I still hear them in my dreams at night. And that is not as hard, my friend, as losing a son. It was too much. But then, slowly, over time, people came alongside me. My brother Robert shared how he survived losing his son Josh when Josh was just a little boy in a car accident. My father-in-law Dennis told me how he and my mother-in-law Patty had survived the loss of their newborn daughter years and years ago, and later their grown son, my brother-in-law who passed away before I would have ever been able to know him. And my friend John Swanson sat with me and electronically sat with me via email and video and shared about losing his daughter. And he encouraged me to relook at Romans 8:28 about how God can use your pain for good. And all these people loving on us, the same things happened with Lisa and the other kids. Other people came alongside them. And all of these people loving on us, sharing how they found their feet again when devastating things happened. They became like the nerds, the chemists in the lab for me, because all of a sudden it was possible in my mind for someone to survive losing a child. It was possible for someone to go through that and find faith again, because I saw faithful people who had done it. And it was possible to breathe and move and even perhaps stop being so mad at God that I couldn't feel him keeping his Psalm 34:18 promise of being close to the brokenhearted. And when I stopped being so mad, I could actually feel him there, keeping that promise. And all of a sudden, I could see a little light, just a little bit, off in the distance of my heart again. And we started moving forward with our lives again. One day I came in the room and I saw my daughter Kaylin, and she was looking at a picture of her brother Mitch. And she had to go back to school. And she said, "Mitch, my brother, we will never move on from losing you. But we have to carry on with our lives in order to honor you. We can't move on, but we have to carry on." And that was enough. So I'm here to tell you today, I'm just here to tell you, friend, that you need to know this. If you have cancer or lupus or ankylosing spondylitis or chronic back pain, that there's a nerd in the lab, there's a chemist or a surgeon or a drug trial or someone working to bring you hope again. And maybe they won't solve it in your lifetime. But here's the thing. If you can push that grief, the pain, the loss, the disease, the infidelity or bankruptcy or abuse aside for just a second, and just take a moment to let yourself feel some gratitude for the nerds, the doctors, the friends, the chaplains, the people who are trying to be God's hands and feet for you, then maybe you'll find that the gratitude will spark something inside you that will let you move again. And this happened to me as I wrote about in the book. Eventually, someone will come along in your world, and you'll say to yourself, they're going through the same thing I am, but they're worse off, or it's fresher for them, or they don't seem to be handling it as well as I am. And maybe you'll shift in your heart just a little bit from suffering to empathizing, from having to carry something to being able to have compassion for someone else. And you'll realize that no one else in that moment can help that person like you can. And then your perspective might shift, and maybe you'll change on the inside like the beekeeper of Aleppo changed me. And like I changed when I was in the worst depths of grief, and a patient asked me if I could help his brother-in-law who had just lost his son. I thought he was crazy. I said, "How can I help your brother-in-law when I don't even know how I'm surviving myself?" And he said, "Well, you're just farther down the path than he is. Maybe you can give him some advice." And I realized that that was the only thing I had to offer him, was that I was still alive, and so he could know that it was possible for him to survive the first 6 months after losing his son. And you know what? That little bit was enough for him. And that's the message for you today. It's a short message, but the message is this. How do you know the next step is possible? Because there are nerds in labs, because there are beekeepers in Aleppo who keep fighting for their lives, because there are other cancer patients who are keeping their faith, and other bereaved parents who are still finding ways to have faith and hope and joy and love in their lives. Listen, no matter what you're going through, you can't change your life until you change your mind. You've got to change how you think. You've got to change the fact that you don't see it being possible right now, but it is possible. You can't see the light right now. If it feels like the darkest night you've ever been through, I just want to remind you that you don't have to do anything for the sun to rise again in a few hours except survive the night. So start believing that the light is still out there, that the sun will, in fact, rise again in your heart. Start trusting the nerds and the chemists and the surgeons and God's love for you. And then if nothing else, just know that I'll be here every week, shining a little lamp of hope into the world for you, out into the void for you. And start today.
Hey, thanks for listening. The Dr. Lee Warren podcast is listener supported. Check out patron.podbean.com/Dr. Lee Warren, patron.podbean.com/Dr. Lee Warren. Patrons and partners get free books, transcripts, special patron-only episodes, and more. And you can have it all at patron.podbean.com. Please subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, wleewarrenmd.com/newsletter, if you want to really connect to this community of folks changing their minds and changing their lives all over the world. Check out the prayer wall, wleewarrenmd.com/prayer to connect with us. Leave your prayer requests. Pray for other people. It's the best part of what we do. Pray first, pray first, pray first. wleewarrenmd.com/prayer. The music for the show is Water into Wine by Tommy Walker, graciously provided for free by Tommy and the good people who are changing the world over at Tommy Walker Ministries. Check out the music and more, and consider supporting Tommy's great work at TommyWalkerMinistries.org, TommyWalkerMinistries.org. forward. Remember, you can't change your life until you change your mind, and you have to start today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren. I will talk to you soon. God bless you, friend. Say, have a good day.